Okay, Martijn Verburg, welcome to the podcast. You are principal software engineer at Microsoft, or what's your exact title?
I'm it's a bit of a mouthful. I'm the principal software engineering group manager, which basically means that I manage managers who manage teams who work on all the core Java engineering stuff we do at Microsoft.
Cool. And maybe would be interesting to hear, how did you came to be in that role?
Yeah, so folks who may know me in the industry as the diabolical developer, who saw me as a Java engineer speaking at conferences and things, may have seen me say things like, I will never ever work for Microsoft, something like 10 years ago when I was a very diehard open source and Linux and Java fan. So yeah, never make foolish statements when you're a young engineer. So I had a company called JClarity that I co-founded with Ben Evans and Kirk Pepperdine. So Ben Evans, folks may know from various O'Reilly book titles, and Kirk Pepperdine for his performance tuning expertise. So we had a startup which we built some tooling to help folks understand like why Java applications and services were going slow. We use machine learning to dig into all the telemetry from the JVM and kind of figure out what was going on. We also got heavily involved in a program of work called Adopt OpenJDK, which is now a part of the Eclipse Foundation called Eclipse Adoptium. So folks may recognize that as kind of the vendor neutral, free as in beer and free as in use, OpenJDK binary. And so we were sort of a founding member of that as well. So towards the sort of end of that, we were, becoming fairly successful as a business and had quite a lot of influence in the Adopt community. And then, a bunch of the large tech companies approached us and said, hey, would you like to come and continue your story here with us? And Microsoft actually gave us, by far and away, the most compelling sort of vision for how they saw Java and their commitment to open source and open communities. And so we ended up there in late 2019.
So you've been at work at Microsoft for a few years now?
And just a little over 2 years, yeah.
I think people are still surprised to hear Java and Microsoft in the same sentence. So maybe you can explain, like, Java at Microsoft. What is that all about?
Yeah, it's so much bigger than people expected. So Microsoft actually depends massively on Java. So there are some obvious subsidiaries as part of the Microsoft family, like Minecraft, Java Edition, LinkedIn, Yammer, for example. So there's kind of three large subsidiaries which use Java extremely heavily. We also use Java on a bunch of the big Azure services. So we have things like the Azure Big Data Services, so stuff like Synapse, HD Insight, Cosmos DB. And they run behind the scenes lots of Spark and Kafka type workloads and that sort of thing. So there's a ton of Java there. And then there's also dedicated Java services for Java developers to deploy things. So we have Azure Spring Cloud, for example. That's a dedicated platform as a service for Spring workloads. And the list just goes on. And I'm usually not allowed to talk about numbers, but it's safe to assume that we definitely have, in the realms of millions plus JVMs running at Microsoft, let alone the third-party customer workloads that then run on things like our Kubernetes service or our VMs. So that's the big interest. Like, there just is a huge amount of Java that gets used at Microsoft, and an increasingly large number of customers who want to run their Java workloads on our cloud.
Right. So are these just like all these different projects? Is there like a strategy behind it? Like when Java gets used at Microsoft, or is it like because of historical reasons, or how does that work?
Yeah, so some of it is historical. So some of it was just brought in because of these subsidiaries joining Microsoft. Other reasons were deliberate choices. So, when you talk about running big data services, there is the natural inclination to look at all the Apache big data projects and leverage the technology that's there. And then there is, of course, a very deliberate strategy in place right now to, how can I put this? So Microsoft is a cloud. Its philosophy is you can bring whichever language or runtime or workload you have and run it on our cloud in the way that you want.
Right.
And so you see us doing things like looking at the market and saying, well, Spring and Spring Boot and Spring Cloud are obviously very popular frameworks, but people don't want the hassle of running their own Kubernetes, as an example, right? Because that's quite painful. So we built Azure Spring Cloud to fill that gap in the market, as an example. And we also see us, putting out services like JBoss EAP, for example, an Azure app service that is a first-class citizen. So you can run clustered JBoss as a service inside Azure, for example.
Yeah, so a big thing is actually making Microsoft ready to have big shops that use Java as a client on the cloud platform. Is that kind of what you're saying? Is that a big strategy?
Exactly, and we already have a number of those. So you talk about Fortune 500 companies and all those sort of big enterprises that you can imagine are household names. There are several of those who are already running their Java workloads on Azure, and I don't have the names to hand as to which ones we publicly talk about. That's something I can send you after the show. But I think if you go to Microsoft.com and you look at customer success stories, you'll definitely see a few Java stories on there for sure.
So how does that work in practice? What type of work do you need to do to optimize for those type of workloads? What's going on in the background?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that my group does. So we're so there's lots of Java teams at Microsoft, but my group is called the Java Engineering Group. You could see us as, I guess, as the core Java group that really looks after OpenJDK and Java itself. So we work on that itself. And we build a lot of the diagnostic tooling to help you figure out, like, why is my Java going slow on a container? That kind of stuff. So we do a lot of research and send out a lot of internal education and communication to the various field teams that we have. And we also are enhancing our tooling. There's something called Application Insights, which is Microsoft's sort of, APM for Azure. And you see kind of a lot of our research being turned into tooling, which then goes into that to help users tune their Java workloads.
So do you, I read something about a specific OpenJDK version from Microsoft itself. How does that work?
That's correct, yeah. So as you can imagine, we have a bunch of customers who want to know they're running on something which was built by Microsoft on Microsoft servers, right? It's all about securing supply chain and component governance, a very hot topic these days. So yes, we do have our own Microsoft build of OpenJDK for Java's version 11 and 17. And we actually support that for quite a wide range of platforms. So it's Linux, obviously, and ARC64. So ARM chipsets, so Apple Silicon, Windows on ARM, Linux on ARM, we support. And the idea here is that it's primarily for Azure. So if folks want to run their Java workloads on Azure and they use our Microsoft build of OpenJDK, they also get free support for that. So that if they can literally, I won't quite say call me up on the phone, but they can raise a support ticket if the JVM crashes, and my group will go fix that for free. People are also welcome to use that build outside of Azure, but they just have to go to our GitHub community pages to look for sort of community level support. There's no commercial support agreement in place there.
So is there something specific about the OpenJDK version at Microsoft, or is it just more of the integration and the security and having the Microsoft stamp of approval, or are there like specific optimizations or?
Yeah, so as it stands today, it's mostly the latter. It's just integrations and our stamp of approval, and we obviously take care about which CA certs we ship and all that sort of stuff. There are a couple of small enhancements already. For example, we intrinsified the MD5 sum on our build of OpenJDK because, as it turns out, our Azure SDK, which is the library you use to talk to all the different Azure services on the command line, or you can embed that in your existing application. We have a Java version of that, and that happens to still use a lot of MD5. And so we decided, hey, let's go speed that up for all of our customers. And you'll see us doing more little things like that. But the key thing is we have two philosophies. One is we will always attempt to upstream our changes. And we did in this case, right? We offered it to OpenJDK. OpenJDK for Java 11 actually rejected that patch because they said it wasn't significant enough for an upstream, a maintenance version, which Java 11 effectively is. So they have a very risk-averse policy there.
Right.
But it was accepted further up at Java 17, for example. So we'll always try and upstream things. And of course, we always pass the TCK, so you know that it's compatible, right? You're not going to have weird behavior because you're using our build. And so that gives customers confidence that we're not doing anything strange.
Right. So you're also really focusing on contributing back to the to the open source community in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think Microsoft as a whole keeps trying to hammer home the message, but we are all in on open source these days. It's since about 2014, 15, I think Satya kind of put down the marker for that. And so, yeah, it really is a cornerstone. And personally for me, again, it was the reason why we, chose to go with Microsoft when we got acquired, because they didn't just talk about that as a philosophy. You could see they walked it as well with things like the .NET Foundation and stuff like that.
Right. So what about more like the developer facing side of things? Like, for example, Microsoft is nowadays quite well known for Visual Studio Code. Is there also work being done there?
Absolutely. So we have a dedicated team in Shanghai which works on the Visual Studio Code Java pack. So they work hand in hand with Red Hat, who run the language server. And yeah, like a lot of surveys recently has actually put Visual Studio Code as kind of the number 2 editor behind IntelliJ for Java.
Wow.
And the reason I think it's this is my personal hypothesis. It's not backed up by any serious data that I'm sure our product folks on the VS Code side do this sort of research, but my team doesn't. I personally use Visual Studio Code when I'm doing a small bit of full stack development, or whether I just need to quickly go and edit something. And because of its very lightweight nature, and because of the plugin structure and how nicely it integrates with the various cloud providers and stuff, I do tend to reach for it first. And only if I need to do like a serious debugging, massive refactoring session, do I drop back to IntelliJ. And I think we're finding a lot of developers are doing that, and it makes sense, right? We're Visual Studio Code. It's not aimed to be a fully fledged IDE. It's not out there to try and compete with IntelliJ directly in that realm. But it is really designed for those kind of full stack microservice developers, I think.
Nice. So what I'm also curious, because you're obviously a very experienced Java guy with also a lot of connections with all kinds of other people working in the Java space. Like, how do you see the future of the language, which is nowadays kind of a hot topic, where people are sometimes saying like, maybe it's not going to be so relevant anymore, or it's going to change. Like, how do you see it personally?
It's got an incredibly strong future. There's like constantly, analyst firms do a bunch of research on this stuff, and they look at sort of the net growth of new Java engineers joining the Java ecosystem and versus, say, JavaScript or others. It's still like the first or second fastest growing ecosystem. And, the people who are on a Hacker News and maybe kind of these more bleeding edge places, they love to rail on about Java and how it's old and XYZ and boring, but it just isn't backed up by the stats out there, right? And you see Java pushing into all of these new spaces constantly. When it became the big data language of choice, for example, we're now seeing stuff like image recognition being done in Java, and it just keeps moving into different verticals all the time. And I think part of the strength is because it is evolving more quickly as a language, and I think Oracle is doing a fantastic job as stewards of the language to speed it up, to make it more relevant for the modern age. And so I think as long as Java shops are willing to spend that little bit of time and effort to especially do the move from Java 8 to 11, which is the painful one, and we've all been through it. And at Microsoft, we helped push all of our subsidiaries through it. So LinkedIn is now on Java 11. Minecraft is actually on Java 17. Yammer is on Java 17, so on and so forth. And the benefits are just huge. And now that all those folks are enjoying modern Java, their developer productivity has gone through the roof. Operational costs have gone down. So I think there's a strong future for Java. Absolutely.
So what are actually those benefits? Because this is also a hot topic inside our company, the Java upgrades, and we have got guys working at spaces where there's still old versions, really trying to get people to upgrade, but then they say like it's too much work, the risk is too high, et cetera, et cetera. But you're saying like there's so much gains?
Huge gains. So if you can imagine, entities like LinkedIn and Minecraft, right? These are huge, vast entities. They run lots and lots of Java, and they just wouldn't engage in an upgrade like this if it wasn't worth it.
Right.
And so, I don't want to steal their thunder, because you're going to see a joint blog post coming out from LinkedIn and Microsoft in the not too distant future, detailing some of the really hard performance numbers of the migration from Java 8 to 11. But you really are talking, double-digit improvements, for throughput, latency, reduction in footprint, these kind of, I think, there's plenty of blog posts out there covering all the cool new features. But, the ability to use, stuff like pattern matching and records and things early on, again, it just starts to close that gap with, dare I say it, some of the leading languages on the JVM like Kotlin.
Yeah, that was actually interesting that you brought that up. That was also one of my questions. We've got some people also working in places where they're starting to use Kotlin and these types of languages more. Is that also something that you look at specifically at Microsoft, or not really? How do you see that space?
It's something we definitely look at. We obviously have, our Android Studio tool with the Xamarin acquisition that we did some time ago. And so we do see folks, of course, writing Kotlin for Android applications, very much so. We don't see as much server-side Kotlin. I personally really like the language because it's a very readable language for me. So whenever I see some of my engineers writing, so for example, the API that drives adopt OpenJDK or Eclipse Adoption, that thing has served over 380 million downloads.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, that sort of an API, it's a very asynchronous streaming kind of Lambdas-based API, if you look at the underlying code, which is all out there in GitHub. People can go take a look at it. If that had been written in Java, I think it would definitely have been harder to read, harder to write, harder to understand, just because of lots of the asynchronous streaming reactive type code. Kotlin still makes that better, right? It still makes the business logics stand out far more than the kind of boilerplate of collections and streams and type calls and maps and map reducers and things. But I do see that gap closing. It's closed in Java 17, and I think once we get the full value types and records, conjunction coming together, I dare say that, hopefully Java 21, knock on wood, that gap will be closed even further. And I think a little bit like how the Scala usage dropped off once Java 8 and 11 really came out and added lambdas and things, we may see a reduction in Kotlin again then. That would be my guess.
So overall, you're saying, like, because Java itself is evolving at a more rapid speed, you think the language will actually be catching up to alternatives like Kotlin?
I really do. And I think, in the case of Kotlin's always going to have certain language idioms that Java will just never be able to do. And I think Brian Gertz has even spoken about this publicly, right? There's just some backwards compatibility things which can never be undone, or, maybe 10 years in the future. So Kotlin will always have a strong place, I think. But I'm pretty sure what really killed Scala wasn't all of the internal fighting in that community or big language changes. I think it was actually the fact that Java 8 just added lambdas and streams.
Interesting. So we've also got a lot of guys working at places where they're using Azure and Java. Is there any tips you can give people? Because I saw in some of your online presentation that there's quite a lot going on in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key differences, one of the sort of competitive advantages we almost have on Azure is the Azure SDK itself. The Java version of that is written in a very idiomatic Java fashion. We have Jonathan Giles in New Zealand, who's, folks may know from the industry, he's a diehard Java architect who really pushes that team to create an API, which is idiomatic modern Java. And so my pro tip for anyone who's doing Java work on Azure is to really take a look at that Azure SDK and utilize that in your own application as much as possible. And you'll get a lot of joy and a lot of benefit out of it. The other thing that's coming along in the not too distant future is more work around things like managed identity and dealing with secrets and that sort of stuff. So there's going to be a lot of streamlined work coming through shortly for that, which is something to look out for. So keep an eye out on product blogs and things.
And it's already possible, right, to just take your Spring application and drop it directly on the Azure Cloud interface, right? That's already kind of in place. And
yes. Yeah, so Azure Spring Cloud, that's the service you want to go take a look at, and so all of that kind of Kubernetes auto scaling type stuff, security logging, all those things that you operationally you might not want to deal with. That's very much there for you, yeah. And Azure Spring Cloud was built in conjunction with Pivotal, and so you kind of know that the subject matter experts on Spring themselves were very much involved in helping put up that service.
Nice. So. Is there any other topic that we didn't cover where you're like, maybe there's something interesting or some new developments going on that would be interesting for people to know or to follow?
Yeah, I think just as a general topic, the whole issue of what happened with Log4Shell last year was super interesting, right? And
Yeah.
Dare I say it, we were lucky in a way in Microsoft that Microsoft has it's a large company, it has a very well-established mechanism for dealing with big security incidents that are global, right? A security team a virtual security team gets put in place, and it's. I think I tweeted last year that it was hands down one of the most impressive professional moments of my life, seeing that machine go into operation and seeing how professionally it was all dealt with. But obviously, not every company has those resources behind it. And if you're a small to medium-sized enterprise, or if you're just a system administrator at a school, for crying out loud, it's just these incidents are awful. And so I would love for everyone in the industry, in the Java industry, to sort of see security and component governance as the next kind of TDD kind of philosophy thing we need to go solve, right? We had a problem with testing in the Java ecosystem. We started to add JUnit and the philosophy of TDD and test-ng and stuff, and this largely a solved problem. I think security is kind of one of these next horizons, which is an unsolved problem, largely speaking. And I'd love to see the whole industry sort of take ownership and improve that.
Yeah. So do you have any tips for people who want to increase their knowledge in that space or want to contribute?
Yeah, so there's a developer advocate at Sonatype called Steve Poole. He was formerly at IBM, and he's been around the industry for a very long time. So he's putting together a bunch of talks and resources, aimed at the day-to-day Java developer of like how to start thinking like a security engineer, but with a Java bent to it. Because the challenge he's found is that, engineers are smart, Java engineers are equally smart, but they went all the way through university and all the way through the early stage careers learning nothing about security practices.
Yeah.
Whereas a vast majority of us were at least taught some sort of TDD or testing, maybe not at university, but at least in our first jobs, right?
Right.
So he's trying to kind of create material to backfill that learn and see what he's got.
Yeah, so maybe if you can share some of those links, I can include them in the
I will definitely do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so anything else you want to add, or do you think we covered?
Tell your bosses to let you move to Java 11 and beyond. And if your bosses resist, tell them to feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, right? Like I have all the business justification in the world to help them get over that hurdle. Yeah, because I'm a manager these days, so I talk spreadsheets and dollars and all that sort of stuff. So I get there. I get why they hesitate, right? And I understand they don't want to, disrupt the business as usual stuff, but it really is time to move on. So
yeah, we've got a lot of guys actually always complaining about this, that they can't convince people. So they might take you up on the offer.
Yeah, no, very, very welcome. And the key thing is, I'll say this to everyone who's listening in, you have to learn to speak in the language of the business people, right? And when you start talking about, cost savings, increased revenue, number of FTE, full-time employee equivalents that you're saving time for, that then starts to make sense in their language. And I think we as engineers need to sometimes learn to speak to the business a little bit better in that way.
Yeah, because what I hear a lot is it's mostly them complaining like, I can't use all these new cool language features, but that's not really the way to convince your manager, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so usually talking about the operational benefits in terms of, hey, it's easy to containerize modern Java, it's cheaper to run, all that good stuff. Those are things that really matter.
Cool. Well, Martijn, thank you very much. That was a very interesting perspective.
And, thank you. It's very nice to be on the show.
Cool. I wish you all the best at Microsoft, and we're definitely gonna follow along and see what happens in the next few years.
Excellent, thank you. So we have a Twitter handle, which is Java at Microsoft. So if you want to see what we're up to, do jump on that. And that's my group and other groups who post interesting things there. And not too much product marketing spam, I promise. We're very careful about it.
Sure. Thanks for all the details. Have a great day, and maybe talk to you again in the future.
Brilliant. Right. Thanks very much. See you later.
Cheers, Martijn. Bye-bye.
Bye.